Alright then, gamers. We just finished watching the Spear Showcase live stream. Very exciting stuff, so you know exactly what every ability is doing right now. Of course, it is just kind of a beta version, so things will change, and of course that means my opinions on these things might change as well. Definitely looking forward to trying these out in the beta. But you know what? I thought it would be a little bit of fun after watching that stream. Okay, kind of talk about the spears a bit, put them in a tier list as well from, you know, which ones are, like, incredibly hype, which ones are, you know, maybe not quite as exciting. You know, I will say, to kind of open up, though, I certainly wouldn't look at any of them and go like, wow, this sucks, to be clear. I think that all the spears are going to be a strong addition to the game, and even though not all of them are as mechanically interesting as the others, and, you know, I'm definitely more hyped about some of them to kind of mess around with them than others, I think all of them will serve a purpose and at least offer some additional options and playstyles. So that's kind of like the initial summary. So in terms of initial summary, I'd say the spears are all looking pretty damn strong, if you ask me, in terms of adding something to the game and, you know, giving players something to play around with and enjoy. That being said, though, you know, we all have our favorites, and we're going to be doing that now in no particular order. We're just using the regular tier list here. Ignore the elite specializations. We're just going to be using the core ones. We find to get some value out of having the core icons here. And yeah, wow, like this is actually very exciting. Looks like we're going to be doing Elementalist first. And oh boy, yeah, this one is really cool. I really think that Elementalist Spear is one of those examples where the devs kind of looked not only at what players were looking for, but also like a very big absence in not only the playstyle and kind of roleplay elements of Elementalist and kind of that mage archetype, but also the gameplay elements too, right? Like having that ranged damage option kind of wasn't really a thing for Elementalist outside of World versus World, where you, of course, still have Staff Weaver and so on and Staff Catalyst able to kind of be that mage-style caster, and that's exactly what Elementalist Spear is, and they have dialed it up to 11. The effects on these weapons are absolutely insane. You have loads of exciting abilities. Like you can summon a volcano that's like bigger than your character. There's rocks all over this. You're sending out tidal waves, massive symbols etching on the ground, and you know that's just like from the kind of the spectacle implications. I think the combat implications as well are really important. Like having a ranged DPS option is a healthy thing for the game, in my opinion. And again, I'm sure it will be tuned in such a way that it is going to be that powerful option. It is a kind of glass cannon ability. I actually really like that it has a dedicated slot, the third skill. They're a bit more utility focused with some defensive stuff in there as well. So, you know, normally, you know, when you're playing a DPS LE build, you might be like cycling every single one of your skills. You might not necessarily have a utility button ready to press a lot of the time, especially because your utility skills are very committed to doing damage on Elementalists a lot of the time, or of course, like providing boons. And that, I think, is where the spear can actually help out a little bit there, because you have a little bit of utility packaged in there. Again, it's not group support, it's very much individual. It's for the Elementalist to have some kind of defensive, some kind of utility, like mobility and so on, which I think is really good design, actually. This is going to be a really fun weapon. And you know what? Look, let's stop messing around, okay? We're not going to mess around anymore. It's going in S tier, and actually it's going a little bit higher than S tier. The ability names are also really exciting. The etch mechanic is honestly incredible, right? It is incredible. The 5th skill on every single weapon puts on a massive symbol that visually charges up as you use spells in it. Then you unleash a giga spell, then an extra bonus effect plays around the etch, and then it sends out a spell effect. Seriously, the amount... There's almost like more visual effects that went into Elementalist Spear than every other weapon combined. I am not joking. They wanted to make the Elementalist Spears, the Elementalist players have some serious fun and really get immersed into that major roleplay. And they've done it. They absolutely have. Yeah, and Lorcan, who's already predicted it, look, I have to call this HABOOB tier, okay? Because the Earth Etch ability, you charge it up and you send out like a dust storm, but it's like a very specifically named dust storm called a HABOOB. And I was like, come on, it's gotta be HABOOB tier, right? Like that. I mean, yeah. Seriously, well done, Ada. I've got to give him credit for this. It is absolutely fantastic. Like the skills are diverse. I also like the additional layered mechanic that the 4 ability kind of rewards you for being accurate, right? You have like 2 AoE rings, like a donut, right? Like, and if you get people in the smaller one, the center of the donut, then you get a bonus effect. That's really fun. I think that's very skill testing, very rewarding for players to mess around with. The etch mechanic is really exciting. The ability effects are incredible. I think it fills, and this is oh, I kind of forgot to mention this before we get into the tier list. I definitely want to talk about, do I think the weapon has a purpose? Is it going to fulfill a role in the game? And I think it absolutely will, to be honest with you. Like, it is going to be that range DPS, and ArenaNet very clearly want to push that in there, you know, to fill that role for the Elementalist. And yeah, it will do that. I mean, it should, unless the numbers aren't very good, but they could always increase those, so we're in business. Very cool. Very, very cool indeed. Elementalist is in HABOOB tier. Okay, next up is going to be Engineer. Just going to go through this in the random order that we have here. So this one is actually kind of the condition counterpart to Hammer, actually. That's kind of the interesting thing here. It's a melee condition damage weapon, and it's very centered around this focus mechanic. So basically, you can mark targets, a bit like Deadeye, and then you get a bonus effect. And it does appear that you can actually mark more than one target, although they were playing with like no cooldowns on the, you know, in the test environment. So of course that might kind of, you know, come into play, and like how many targets can you actually mark? Maybe you can only do one with cooldowns, as the way that works, but we'll see. But essentially, that's the central mechanic. You mark a target and then you wallop people with bonus effects. It's this kind of electricity-oriented weapon. And you have this, the other kind of cool thing is that you have this AoE that you can project, like the lightning rod mechanic, where you strike nearby enemies and you charge up your spear. You can actually see it assembling around you, and then you fire it into the air, and then it lands on people, getting, like, you know, big damage, big con. There's a lot of burning on this weapon as well. It's like a burning oriented weapon. That conditioned DPS there. It does have a bit of hybrid damage as well. Like, it's, you know, it's not just like a complete wet noodle in terms of power, but it leans into that condition damage thing there as well. You know, I think that kind of makes sense, right? You know, like, if you know, when you think about it, it's, you know, I'm surprised I didn't think of this, right? Is that, yeah, there's kind of a melee comedy weapon with mace. You can go like mace pistol if you want to go in that direction, but, you know, mace is more of a hybrid weapon, and there's no two-handed condition damage weapon, right? You've got a two-handed power damage weapon with the hammer, and then the spear is going to be this condition damage setup there as well. This one I think is a little bit harder to predict how it's gonna go in terms of impact on the game. That's for sure. I think a lot of it will come down to the tuning, but I will openly admit I'm not totally sure, like, you know, if this is going to completely revolutionize things. Like, weapons are always hard with Engie, and kind of the same with Ellie as well. I think that's why they went kind of all out on Ellie, is because there's no weapon swap there, right? So it can't kind of, it has to be very defining, actually, if you're going to have a new weapon on Engie and Ellie, because if it isn't, then it's kind of hard to have it as a secondary set. Like, you can't kind of tack it onto an existing build, yeah? And that's something that I think a lot of other classes have the advantage on, in terms of making it a little bit easier for ArenaNet to design things for them, actually. So that's kind of worth bearing in mind here. I would say that it honestly, it looks pretty cool. You know, it's a pretty exciting weapon. I'm not totally enamored by the mechanic, if I'm being 100% real. Actually, you know, it's impressive. You know, it looks cool. You know, once again, the art team was blasting with this one. And it's actually kind of we'll do it like this as well. I'm not calling any of this stuff like D tier. Come on, don't be ridiculous. I think I would very solidly say Engie is definitely kind of going into the A tier. I think it's cool. I found myself excited by it a little bit. You know, Condi weapon, lightning, you know, you fire a spear, it's got some cool effects. One thing that's really nice is when you're charging up your lightning rod, you can go into kits. I think that was a really good design consideration that they actually made there. But, you know, it's alright. You know, it's alright. I think I'm actually going to demote it. It's B tier. I think it was not one of my favorites, to be honest. It's not one of the ones that I'm giga hyped about. Let's continue. Thief. Thief S tier, immediately. This one, I think, is really cool. I think especially if you're a Thief player in PvE, actually. But I certainly think there will be some applications in competitive modes as well, actually. Just kind of looking at it. It's almost like a bit of a brawler-style weapon in those modes. But in PvE, I think it's really going to bring some big excitement to the way that you actually play your Thief in PvE from a rotational perspective. So the key mechanic is the lead, follow-up, and then finisher moves, right? So the 2 and 3 skills are linked, so they're in like the same state. So when you use one of them, the other one will flip over. Then if you use the other one that you didn't use will then flip over again. So you have these combos, right? And they kind of set each other up, right? So, like, for example, one is, oh, yeah, you apply cripple to a target. And then the next one says, well, if they've got a movement impairing condition, then you immobilize them, right? That kind of stuff, right? So you kind of have that chain, as it progresses, so they kind of lead into each other. Very, very cool mechanic overall. And I think they were clever about how they designed this too, actually, because the 2 skill is kind of a damage-oriented ability, and then the 3 skill has damage, of course, but it's more utility-focused. So it's really encouraging you to kind of go like, oh, we're going to pump with the 2 skill, but then, check this out, maybe I want to get some utility from that 3 skill, get that activation, right, out of that, and then go back to the damage combo. You can kind of weave these things together, I think, in a really exciting way. And more importantly, after that, once you've done your finisher, you actually get bonus effects as well on the 4-5 or the stealth skill, which I think is really cool. Like, Thief has always struggled in PvE with kind of being a bit of a 2-2-2-2-2 class, right? With like weakening charge spam and so on. And, ArenaNet were very clear that, that might end up being the case depending on the numbers, but they'll try to prevent that, right? They will do tuning to kind of make it rewarding to go out, to have this slightly more diverse rotation in how you go about playing this, right? Like, the stealth attack is going to refund your initiative too, right? So you can kind of get in there and refund your initiative. Like the 4 and 5 skill, again, get those bonuses when you actually go into them, like from that finisher skill, which I think is a really fun mechanic. And it means that you kind of can keep that combo going, right? Like in particular, the 4th skill, like if you use it after a finisher, it counts as a lead attack, right? So you can like immediately go into the follow-ups straight after that. It is a condition damage-oriented weapon, kind of a bit of a hybrid, but, certainly leaning towards Condi, I feel like. In that regard, which, I think that works. I don't have a particular objection to that. Like, Thief is a little bit weird when it comes to weapons. Like, a lot of their weapons are kind of niche in a way, and this definitely is quite a well-defined weapon attached to that too. It does also, funnily enough, this is like something that I think is relevant in all game modes, but I think also quite exciting in PvE. It does actually have like a block. The 5th skill is just a straight-up block. It blocks 1 attack, and if it's kind of juiced up, it blocks more attacks as well. It will block up to 3 attacks as well, which is actually a really nifty bit of kind of utility kit and survivability in all game modes, but I think definitely in PvE as well. Because again, bear in mind, it's an initiative skill, right? This is a Thief ability, so theoretically there's no cooldown. So, of course it does have a cost to it, but quite powerful in terms of that. But overall, I think this weapon is actually incredibly hype. I really like the design on it a lot, actually. I think it's going to bring a lot to the table for Thief players. And, if anything, almost set a standard for maybe some design principles that could be applied to Thief in the future, actually. And that's kind of a running theme that we see with these weapons, actually. Like, when you look at these spears, you go, wow. It would be kind of cool if the rest of the game was like this, right? Like, if a lot more weapons ended up being designed like this as well. Okay. Next, Mesmer, A tier. A tier. I wouldn't say quite as giga exciting as Thief or Elementalist, but certainly it's high tier. It absolutely is. Like, some of the visual effects are really cool. It's kind of got this flower motif, this lotus flower motif going on. I really like the central mechanic, actually, of clarity, where you kind of have to hit enemies. You have to keep your distance a little bit, and you kind of have like a donut. Like, you have a big AoE in the middle, and then like a small ring around it. And if you hit people with that ring around, then boom, your other abilities then become empowered as well. I think my favorite interaction with this one is actually the Phantasm. The Phantasm, if you've empowered it with clarity, you send out 2 Phantasms instead of 1, right? You kind of charge towards your target, then Phantasms will poke after you, right? The reason it's super exciting, though, is because of an extra mechanic that these Phantasms have. Like, if they just strike a target, they'll inflict cripple. But if the target is already crippled, it will immobilize, right? And that's a really cool synergy because, of course, if you've got 2 of them, the first one is going to cripple, and then the second one will actually land that immobilize as well. A very elegant part of the playstyle. Actually, the entire kit of Mesmer, I think, is very elegant with the way that it's set out. And, I'm almost kind of thinking I should be promoting this a little bit because it is also a melee cleave weapon. This is filling a really big kind of hole in Mesmer's kit, actually, is that it hasn't really had this melee cleave weapon, and that's exactly what this is, a power damage melee cleave weapon. And that kind of does fill that void within the toolkit of Mesmer, which I think is a very important part of introducing new weapons into the game. And I think you'll certainly be able to kind of create some new builds and come up with some new ideas as a result of this. And Mesmer will, be able to fill additional kind of combat functions there as well. But pretty good, actually, overall. I would, definitely an A tier. A tier situation, if you ask me. You love to see it. Okay, Necromancer. Ooh. This one is pretty hype, actually. This one is cool, especially because it has a special mechanic on its 5th skill. I'm not sure if it's quite as hype as the Thief one. I will admit that. But, I personally did really like it. I particularly like some of the cooldown resets here. I'm going to go ahead and put it here in the... I'm going to put it in A tier for now, actually. Maybe as I'm going through this, I'll convince myself to actually promote it. But this one is also really exciting. It has this core mechanic of these soul shards that you can build up by using abilities. And, if you fulfill certain conditions, like, for example, if you get targets when they're on their own, right, then boom, you get additional soul fragments. And that's basically a resource that you unleash with your 2 skill, which is called Perforate, which has a sick sound effect. It is actually such a cool sound effect. The sound design is epic on the Necromancer Spear. It really is. And you just, unleash all these charges, stealing life. And if you're lower HP, you steal even more life. But I think the real big star of the show here is actually the interaction between the 4th skill, which is... isolate, and you can teleport in as well. You throw a spear at someone, it's unblockable, very powerful by the way, and you can teleport in on them, and when you do that, boom, you're going to generate some shards, especially if they're on their own, but more importantly, you're also going to recharge your 2 skill immediately, so you can immediately wombo combo people. And here's the best part about that 4. When you leave Shroud, it resets that 4 skill. So you have this inbuilt combo attached to it that I think is just fantastic. Really, really fun. So you can kind of teleport in, use your 2 skill, go in Shroud, start blasting with your Shroud abilities, and then drop out, and you'll be able to do it all over again. I think a really fun dynamic playstyle that's being kind of brought into Necromancer, a bit more mobility, right? Necro's always been quite slow. We saw swords start to build on that a little bit, actually. But now we're seeing that maybe even nudged a little bit further with the spear. And yeah, we've got to talk about the 5th ability as well, actually. This one is cool. I really appreciate the design here because they very clearly thought about this a lot. What the 5th skill does is it will wall up enemies around you. Very cool effect. Remove boons. And it applies a special debuff that prevents the next 3 boon applications to the target. And I like that a lot. It's a 4-second debuff and it's 3 charges, right? It will prevent the next 3 boon applications that gets applied. And that's good because it's a strong effect and a special effect, right? You're gonna only Necromancer Spear can do this. But it's also balanceable, right? It's not gonna be as binary and therefore kind of as problematic as kind of how Winds of Disenchantment was in World versus World. And indeed, in World versus World, it's not going to be as much of an issue because there's so much application there. I think there's definitely more of a, maybe this could even have application in PvE, right? You're preventing a boss from getting boons, for example. Or, of course, in PvP, right? You're isolating a target, you're ripping all their boons, and then boom, they can't get back any more back, right? The support will have a harder time reapplying those boons to that target. I think a very well-designed and very clever mechanic, actually, by the Guild Wars Studios. Man, S tier. I'm sorry, yeah, is it as, I guess, kind of out there as Thief? No, it's not kind of as, kind of crazy and, oh, wow, this is a sick new mechanic, right? It's not. I think Thief has that kind of additional oomph of really bringing something new to the class, but I really have to say, I appreciate the design on Necromancer Spear so much that I think it absolutely has to go into S tier, actually. I think its design is to be frank, fantastic. I really appreciate it. Kind of from a game nerd perspective, I think it's a clever weapon. And I really respect that about a lot of these spears, actually, but certainly Necromancer. in particular. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing about Thief as well. Thief Spear, just like the Ranger auto attack that we saw on the blog, it actually has a ranged version and a melee version. The ones that have that, and in case I forget to bring that up again, it's Ranger, Rev, and Thief all have the dual mechanic, right, where you have a melee version and a range version. I will say that functionally they appear to be relatively similar, right? Like they're not super, different in terms of the functionality there. Especially Thief, actually. Thief and Rev are very similar. But, like, Rangers is a bit more of a differentiation. But, yeah, anyway, that's also kind of a cool thing to bring up there as well. And I guess, speaking of Revenant, here we go. And the Rev one... Ooh, Rev. I think this one is a bit of a visual feast. It looks super cool. Like, there's this core mechanic where you're charging up abyssal, like abyssal echoes, like crushing abyss. And your character kind of becomes more and more demonic, right, over time, pretty much. It looks absolutely fantastic. A lot of the abilities look pretty cool. Like, the mines are all spiky and stuff like that when you do the little evade there. I will say, I don't feel that it's, I don't think that its design vision is quite as strong as the other ones. It's one that I'd maybe like to see maybe pushed in a certain direction a bit more. It's quite a strange weapon too. It's actually mid-range. It's not 900 range. It's a 600 range weapon. I suppose that. Very focused on dealing torment damage and a little bit of chill kind of packaged in there as well. And I actually quite like the initial mechanic. The way it basically operates is that you recharge your 5th skill, with all of your other abilities pretty much. Like, like if you fulfill conditions, if you hit more targets with the 4 skill that kind of pulls people in, then it recharges more and so on. And every time you use that Abyssal Raise, you are going to actually get more damage, right? Like it kind of stacks up, it like ramps up over time. Like you can get 2 stacks of this buff and you want to maintain it, right? Like you maintain this buff and you keep pumping out these really high damage Abyssal Raises over time. I just think that, I don't know, I'm kind of almost struggling to articulate it here. It's like it needs maybe a little bit more a bit more of kind of a purpose, I guess. I'm not sure how it really defines itself as a weapon and as this like very like very defined function. It feels like it has a little bit of overlap with stuff like short bow, I think, and I'm not sure if it's really going to introduce new playstyles to Rev. I think that's kind of hard with Rev because Rev has quite a lot of relatively well-varied weapons, I want to say, overall. And I think the spear will be fun, and I'm sure it will be powerful as well. But I'm not sure if it's really bringing anything super new to the table, actually, with a new Rev spear. So that's why I would say it's, it's good. I think, it looks cool. I think it sounds cool. It's a little bit slower than the other weapons too, actually, and that might be kind of like influencing my decision here. Like, a lot of the other spears are very fast-paced, like very high octane. But yeah, this, it's all right. It's all right. Ranger. This is S tier. It's S tier. I'm sorry. It is S tier. This is another one that I really like the design of. The fluidity of how all the moves work together is really exciting. Like, the Ranger Spear is the perfect example of kind of this top-down design philosophy that we see in some of these weapons, where the devs have these combos that they kind of want you to land, right? Like, they want you to be like landing like this big spear throw, and then boom, you lunge in to kind of finish them off, right? It's got some execute damage on some of these abilities. It's really cool the way that your abilities kind of power up when you go in stealth. All 4 of your skills that aren't auto attacks get a bonus when you go into stealth. I think it's incredibly cool, actually. Like, when you double empower your 5th ability, you like throw a spider's web at people and you net them. Really fun thematic ranger skill. Then it says like your pet gets excited for the hunt and like charges in as well, like, like starts biting people, right? The animations are fantastic. I actually really like a decision. They made this on a couple of the spears actually as well, with how they're not they're melee, right? But they're a little bit more than melee, right? They're kind of like 300 range rather than the normal 170 range. So you're kind of like lunging in, but keeping your distance a little bit, and then like you prod them with the spear as well. Really cool design, and just like watching this, it really looked cool to play actually as well. Like all of the abilities were very clearly designed to be linked. It almost feels like the Thief design in a way, right? It's almost like a combo. Like every piece of the toolkit is designed to be a setup for something else. And that's a really strong design, actually, and it really leans into the strengths of the Guild Wars 2 combat system. So yeah, I think the design on the Ranger Spear is actually really, really cool. Ranger is one of those other classes, actually, that I don't think it needs new weapons in the sense that Ranger is one of the most versatile classes in the entire game, actually. You've got power builds, you've got condi builds, and all the weapons are good. Like, Ranger is almost in the state right now that I think ArenaNet want a lot of other classes to be in. Right, like if you look at Ranger weapons, like Sword is good, Axe main hand is good, Axe offhand is good, Warhorn's good, Hammer's good, Staff is good, Longbow's good, right? You can go on, right? Almost every single one of their weapons is actually really powerful and fulfills its role in a variety of areas of the game. And, Spear, in a lot of ways, Spear is going to have a bit of competition here. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be some competition for Spear. And that is one thing that I would say, is that Spear, in some sense, might struggle to break in to the Ranger metagame because of how well-rounded and how I didn't even mention maces, right? Like, how powerful the weapons actually are. I certainly think that in PvP, it's really going to have some ability to shine because it does have this mobility. It has this stealth. So you have that disengage, kind of you're on the hunt, prowling around, lunging in, like locking enemies down. You've got big CC, like you can immobilize targets, right? Like you can do big burst damage, spiking people, and you still have that ranged pressure as well. It is a really exciting new thing too, actually, with Ranger, because it has both melee and ranged abilities on the same weapon. In a lot of ways, man, Ranger almost deserves to be in HABOOB tier. I'm serious here, because I think it really leans into the spear fantasy incredibly well because it has both of these things. It's a throwing spear and it has key abilities like a big nuke. It was described almost like a ranged maul, like the Greatsword 2. Like you want to dodge this, right? Like the spear glows as a bit of a cool telegraph, right? And then like you boom, you like throw it in. And immediately like smash people with it. Really cool. Then you can follow it up with like a big leap. You can summon like a spectral warclaw and like lunge in, or you can empower your throw out of stealth by like having an owl around your spear. I think it really captures the spear roleplay, the Ranger roleplay incredibly well, and overall it might have been a very well designed weapon overall in terms of its kit and the way those abilities function together. And yeah, seeing it I was really impressed actually. I was very impressed by Ranger. Oh man, I feel like Ellie is in HABOOB tier because it has so many crazy visual effects, but in terms of design, I'm not going to change it because I don't want to mess around with it too much. I'm going to I'm going to commit. Like, we're committing, guys. I'm committing, right? But I almost feel like the Ranger Spear is actually the best designed weapon, right? Like, yes, it doesn't quite have the outrageousness of summoning Volcano on Elementalist. I'll say that. That is true. But in terms of design, it is a very, very well-designed weapon, in my opinion. I think you could make a very strong argument that it's the best designed weapon out of all the spears. I guess kind of spoiler alert, but yeah, whatever. Very, very cool, actually. Yeah, I actually have basically nothing bad to say about Ranger Spear. Like, I have basically nothing bad to say about it. I really don't. Okay. Now we do have the meme. And you know what? You know what we're gonna do? We're actually going to reference a fantastic skill from Mesmer to help us out, guys. We're actually going to put Mental Collapse tier here, which is the kind of big power move of Mesmer, which resets your 2 skill on the Mesmer, so you can like line up another epic combo, big stun, big AoE. Mental Collapse tier, I'm afraid it is going to Warrior in this case. And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying that, the devs did a bad job here. In fact, funnily enough, I actually think this weapon could end up being quite powerful. Seriously, this could be good. Like, it's a ranged weapon. It's got AoE on it. If the numbers are good, I'm not gonna lie, it's probably not going to be bad. It will function. It will serve its purpose, and it definitely deserves credit for kind of bringing that new place up to the table. Kind of doing what Rifle maybe doesn't right now for Warrior. And you know what? I will say the Berserker skill is really sick. You just start, the Warrior just starts going crazy and like throws out massive spears all over the place there as well. So I'm not saying it's bad, to be clear. Like, don't worry. It could be very strong actually. But I do feel that its overarching mechanic is the weakest out of all of the spears, and I think it definitely lacks that kind of extra something, that extra spice that all of the other spears have. The focus mechanic, right? Like the Abyssal Raise charge, the clarity on Mesmer, right? The stealth attacks, the combos, right? The cooldown reset and soul shards and HABOOB, right? Like all of that stuff is just so exciting, and it's such an engaging design that a lot of these weapons have. And Warrior's definitely more vanilla. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And I think Warrior, it makes sense that it is a bit simpler. Right? I think Warrior is that class. You're the big gamer with the great sword. You smash people with it. Love to see it. That I think that's part of that Warrior fantasy. But I think I'd like to have seen. I'd like to see a little bit more. Okay, I would have liked to see a little bit more from Warrior. The mechanic is basically when you're closer, you're kind of like throwing the spear with such force, you get bigger AoE, right? Like a more impact on your spear throws. Cool roleplay, right? Not terrible whatsoever, actually, but I'd love to see a bit more interplay between the abilities, right? And that's what I feel like is a little bit lacking here, right? Like there's not quite the level of interconnectivity in the abilities that I think are exhibited in the other weapons, which I think is a real strength of the design here, I think, with Warrior. And that's why, to be clear, jokingly, I will put it in the mental collapse tier, because I think Warrior mains, they are going to be mentally collapsing with seeing what they've ended up with here. But beta is beta, right? Beta is beta. And there may be some changes. They may add some stuff to it and kind of change how it works a little bit. So do not despair, my dear friends. Warriors, you may yet get your salvation. But I definitely do want to underline again, like, if you're on, let's say, a DPS Berserker, this is going to work out great. You're going to be blasting in melee, right? And then if there's a mechanic that happens, like a fight like Ceres, for example, you've got to go out to range, you can keep blasting on your spear. That's actually powerful, right? That is a thing that will almost certainly be good. Very similar to how Elementalist works, of course, in that regard, with being able to kind of maintain your uptime. Like, this is a very powerful thing. We see it with all the ranged DPS classes in the game. Like, it will certainly, it can end up being powerful, right? Like, it absolutely can end up being powerful in that regard. And finally, we get to Guardian. Guardian. I think this is actually a very solid A tier. Actually, I put this one alongside Mesmer, I think, actually. Yeah, I think I would. This one's pretty cool. The first thing is, they're bringing back the loot stick. The auto attack on the spear is the loot stick. It absolutely is. That is just, yes, it's back. And it's definitely a weapon that I think is kind of leaning towards world versus world in particular, and where I feel like this could see play. It's got healing on it, like, you loot stick and heal people. It's got Comni Cleanse on it. It's got AoE resistance on it as well. Of course, it has that illuminated mechanic where you kind of power up your other abilities by linking them together. The duration on illuminated was actually kind of short, actually. Like, it was only 5 seconds, so you definitely have to kind of fairly quickly chain your abilities together to kind of get some value out of that. But I think the star of the show is absolutely this crazy, like, meteor shower effect, right? Like, you fire your spear up into the air, and then boom, it like showers down loads of other little AoEs. It's a little bit like the Renegade orbital bombardment. Like, yeah, no, what game is this? Citadel bombardment, like being fired down onto the ground. Looks absolutely insane. It looks incredibly cool, actually, as alongside the symbol too. And again, it's kind of this hybrid style weapon that's being brought into play with this kind of melee, but you have these ground targeted abilities as well that are coming into play there as well. It's a fun way to bring the loot stick back into the game. I'm sure people are going to enjoy that in the Labyrinth farm and in the open world. And yeah, I really think that in world versus world, it's going to have you know, it's going to have that time to shine. Like right now, there's a very powerful build where I think this could definitely kind of fit in. Shattered Aegis, Celestial Firebrand, where again, it's kind of like a hybrid. It does damage, and it also is a support, like cleanses Condis. This just kind of gives it a bit more of that. You're going to have that AoE. It uses Permeating Wrath, right? Like hitting loads of targets gets AoE burning. Loot Sick is great for that. The Bombardment style ability is obviously going to be great for that. Like the condition removal is just very good in World versus World. It's got some healing attached to it. It's got some good boons. Again, that resistance is super, super powerful in World versus World. So I think that can really see some play in there as well. And I think similarly in PvE, you can be pretty flexible with your weapons on a support build, I think, for Guardian, right? Because, of course, so much of your toolkit on Firebrand, right, is packaged into those terms, into your utility skills. So you can certainly make some use of this, I think, in PvE as well. And, of course, it's going to be it will have a damaging component, too. I think the competition for DPS Guard is pretty stiff right now. There's a lot of pretty damn good weapons out there for DPS Guard. But I think, yeah, certainly when you're kind of looking at where it's going to end up, it's kind of into that World versus World, maybe even in PvP as well, is where it's going to go. And I think overall, just very robust. I think the Illuminator mechanic is fun. I think it's, you know, it's really cool to kind of have these combos and think, what ability do I want to empower, right? Like, which one do I want to do? You can kind of fully juice up the symbol, the fifth one. When you're standing in it, it makes all of your abilities illuminated. If you illuminate the symbol, then even if you leave the symbol, you're still illuminated as long as the symbol is around as well. So lots of really cool stuff going on there. I think just a very solid overall kit. It looks great. I think the mechanic is cool. I think it does have functionality that can be brought into the game as well. There you go. That's my tier list. And I will actually admit that, of course, guys, this is my opinion. If you really like the NG and Rev ones, then you know what? Fair enough. You know, I'm not gonna argue with you. You know, I won't do that because, you know, that will be messed up. You know, I can't do that. But let me know what everyone thinks about this. These are the way that I see these weapons in terms of their design and in terms of their functionality. If you like this kind of stuff, well, you know what you got to do. You got to tell me why in the YouTube comments section as we do around these parts. You know, you love it. Let me know. And honestly, make your own tier list. I want to see your tier list. Give me your tier list. What's going in HABOOB tier for you lot in terms of these weapons? Which one are you most excited about? Which one do you think could use a little bit more time? I don't know. Let me know in the comments, guys. And of course, more content to come. Okay, lots of stuff going on there. Secrets of the Obscure review is coming. I'm still teasing you about that one. Oh, yeah. Okay, stay tuned. A lot of content. Follow, subscribe. Watch the stream where I do all this stuff live. We talk about this stuff all day, okay? We're insatiable, like we're eternal, like we're never-ending. So come back all the time, engage in all the social media, leave comments, like the video, buy the game using that referral. Like, look, if you're an Ellie main and you haven't bought the Ultimate Edition, then you're actually ungrateful. Yeah, I'm gonna say it. Look, you guys know where all those Ultimate Editions went, yeah? They went into making HABOOB, right? Pay up, yes. Come on. What are we doing? But that's going to do it for now, gamers. See you later, YouTube. We're out of here. Ha 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 ha.